Well, hello there. I'm Poppa Jon, and I'm passionate about comic book movies, but I also love nothing more than to explore and analyze horror films. And so if you enjoy heroes and you enjoy horror, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the ding so you don't miss an episode of Heroes and Horror. And today, I'm just simply going to talk about the movies I watched in January. You didn't really have much comic book movie releases. No, not really much superhero movie releases. So this is pretty much all horror movies. Now, January is typically a dumping ground. It's kind of a joke dumping ground month, especially for horror. And I've heard a lot of people complain about January this year, kind of. You know, you haven't had that big January hit. Really? I mean, there's one at the very end that is kind of a big January hit. That being said, a lot of people seem to be complaining, I feel like. And I'm sitting here like, you might not have had that big January hit, but you're also not having giant January stinkers like Night Swim or The Bye-Bye Man. So, like, overall, I thought it was been a pretty good January. Because, yeah, there's one movie that was pretty disappointing, but it wasn't bad. It was still good, just disappointing. Which we'll get into all of that. There's one really bad stinker. The problem is it wasn't a major release. I'm one of like a very few people that have actually seen it for good reason, which I'll get into. But yeah, I mean, without further ado, let's kick the shit to the fan and get this shit started. So first, we're going to describe my tiers. At the bottom, you have the Nightmares on Peachtree Street. These are movies that you never want to watch again, unless like they're like nightmares to sit through. And then you have Oops, which they're just movies. They're oops. Why did you do that? Why did you make that? But they're not necessarily nightmares. There's some merit to them probably. And then you have Yup. These are movies that just kind of exist. They're not necessarily good. They're not bad. They exist. Yup, they exist. And then you have Isn't It Marvelous? These are marvelous movies. These are great movies. They're marvelous. And then at the tippity top, you have Strawberries and Creamin'. These are the movies that will have you strawberry cream in your pants. They're so goddamn good. So without further ado, here we go. And we have Grafted up first. Now, I do not like the fact that Tiermaker put this first, randomized it and made it first, because I wanted this to be more towards the end. This is a movie that I don't think is getting enough attention and enough love. This, I guess, since it is the first one here, but I'll just say this was my favorite movie of January. Yes, you can compare it. It gets unfairly compared to The Substance because it's a body horror movie about women's beauty, but the story itself is very different. It's a very different story, and it does add an element that The Substance doesn't have. Now, I'm not saying it's better than The Substance. It's nowhere near the quality of The Substance. Like, The Substance is one of the best movies, especially best horror movies of, like, the century. Like, it's this Kubrickian, it's like the closest thing Kubrick to a Jesus Christ. It's like the closest thing to a Kubrick movie that wasn't made by Stanley Kubrick. Like, The Substance is, for me at least, very, very, very top tier of all time. Like, it's an all-timer masterpiece. The Grafted's not that. It's not an all-timer masterpiece. But there is one element in here that was missing from The Substance. And that's the slasher element. Like, The Grafted, it is a body horror movie about, like, women's beauty. But it's telling a very different story than The Substance, like I already mentioned. But it also adds slasher elements to it. There's like a fun slasher nature to it with these college kids. So, like, if you don't know what The Grafted is, it's a Shudder release. And it's about this college girl, like college freshman, I believe, whose father just died. Whose father was a scientist who had a skin condition that he was trying to find like a way to graft skin onto his face to fix this skin condition, kind of cure this skin condition. And it goes, one of his experiments goes horribly wrong and he dies. Well, his daughter also has the skin condition. She gets accepted into this big university. She goes and lives with her aunt and her cousin, and she's trying to continue her father's research. And in her attempt to continue her father's research, in her attempt to fix her skin condition and become the more stereotypical, beautiful type of girl, she kind of falls into similar stuff like that you typically see in these body horror movies. But there's also a fun slasher element thrown in here that I really enjoyed. Like I said, this is my favorite movie of January, which means it's my favorite movie of 2025 so far. And while I will not, more than likely, it won't be in this tier when we start getting more movies throughout the year. I want to make that clear. I'm putting it in Strawberries and Creamin' based off of what we've gotten so far in the year. I had a blast with this movie. I loved it. Now, on the complete opposite side of this spectrum, we have The Mouse of Horrors. Mouse of Horrors. This movie is a horror to sit through. And not because it's a good horror movie. This is a movie that makes me question my life choices. This movie is dog shit. This is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And the fact that I said that exact same thing about another Mickey Mouse slasher last year, it makes it hard to defend this trend. This trend and new subgenre-ish. Because it's a trend that I support. And that I'm a big, massive proponent of. Because when I was in high school, 10 years ago, I have nowhere near finished. I kind of even changed the story because the original story I had was terrible. But I started doing I started to write this random rated R Scooby-Doo movie, right? I'm a big fan, and that was 10 years ago before this stuff was even a thing. Now Scooby-Doo's, that's far away from public domain, obviously, but I'm a big fan of taking these childhood cartoons and making these slashers out of them. Some of them I don't think need to be slashers, but horror movies, just rated R movies in general out of them. Because I like that idea. I always have. And the majority of them have not been pulled off to the best of their ability. You have another one in this list that we'll get to that I think, spoiler alert, did actually a fantastic job with it. But the Steamboat Willie ones have yet to do anything past, at best, half a star, half a slice. They are some of the most worst movies you will ever see. And Mouse of Horrors, I think Mouse of Horrors has more merit than The Mousetrap, but the technical aspects are worse than The Mousetrap. Because with The Mousetrap, it was just this random manager that can teleport for some reason, wearing a Mickey Mouse mask. Mouse of Horrors, you actually have a really good design. The killer actually has this really good design. And I think the performance, it's obviously someone doing their best Art the Clown impression, and he's not David Howard Thornton, so it's not going to be as good. But it's a really good design, and you can have fun with that little physical performance that he gives in the mouse costume. And I think the story-wise, they actually try something. It's not just throw a mask on him. They actually try something, but the thing they do try is sort of ripping off the Blood and Honey 2, in a way, story-wise, the whole mad scientist blending human DNA and animal DNA, just kind of ripping it off from that. There's another element that involves Blood and Honey that is just where they kind of use the rejected Winnie the Pooh costume from the first Blood and Honey, which is bad. And you get one of the lamest fights you'll ever see between Pooh and Mickey Mouse in this movie. The movie's bad. It's bad. I don't like the fact that I'm giving it a platform. But another thing, the thing that makes it so bad is the audio. I did not think it was possible to have audio this bad in the 2020s. Just use your fucking iPhone and you'll get better audio than this fucking movie. The sound design, the sound mixing, it's like you get people tiptoeing in this movie, and those tiptoes will sound like, and they'll take 3 steps, but you hear 10 footsteps, and the footsteps, when they're supposed to be tiptoeing, are louder than the bang you get when someone hits a hammer on someone's head, which, first of all, is another thing with this movie. Every time, like, there's actually some decent kills in this movie. The gore effects aren't the best, but there's some decent kills, I think. But every time they use a hammer, it's just thunk. Like, it's literally just, like, what the fuck are you fucking doing? At least make it believable. Make it look like you got hit in the head with a hammer. And make it look like you're actually hitting someone with a hammer. Like, Jesus Christ. This movie's terrible. I'm done talking about it. I'm done giving it a platform.
It ain't over until one of you's eliminated.
Next, Dark Match. I just recorded the review for this because I actually wanted to do a singular review of this just because nobody else was talking about it and I really wanted to talk about it. So, yeah. This is one that I don't want to say, yup, it exists, because I genuinely will remember this movie, and I loved this movie, but I didn't love it because it has these amazing technical qualities and that it's this great movie. I loved it because it was fun, and I am a casual wrestling fan. I'm a big fan of, like, the wrestling industry, stuff like Dark Side of the Ring and all of that, and I'm a big fan of just going back and watching classic 80s and 90s wrestling. I grew up, even though I was born in the late 90s and grew up in the 2000s, weirdly enough, I grew up watching The New Generation, and Shawn Michaels and all that stuff, because we're both sexy boys. I had fun with this. Like, I had genuine blast with this movie. You get homages to Inferno matches, homages to the Taipei death matches from FMW. You get a lot of nice little things in here. It's not a great technical masterpiece, but if you enjoy 80s horror, if you enjoy 80s and 90s wrestling, you'll enjoy this movie, in my opinion. Not a technical masterpiece. I'm going to put it in yup. I want to put it in Isn't It Marvelous for funsies, but I don't think it necessarily deserves it on a technical level. But, yeah. It's going to be at the top of yup. And next we have Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare. This is one where sometimes I feel like I'm on an island, but at the same time, I see people that agree with me as well. I loved Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare. I genuinely loved this movie. Yeah, it takes elements from a bunch of other movies, and it doesn't necessarily do them as well, but it still does a good job. Even if it's not 5-star with them. I genuinely loved this movie. I like how they infused the Peter Pan stuff. Like, I've heard people complain that this has nothing to do with Peter Pan. They just tacked the name on it for a cash grab. And I wholly disagree. Like, that is an argument. I understand that argument when it comes to the Mousetrap, Mouse of Horrors, even the first Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. I think the second one had merit to be a Winnie the Pooh movie. And this one definitely, I think, has merit to be a Peter Pan movie. Is it about the literal Peter Pan? No. But in terms of its name, of naming the movie Peter Pan, it makes sense. Because a real life, I can wholeheartedly, 1000% sit there and believe that a child abductor and child murderer who grew up being obsessed with the Peter Pan story, will take the moniker of Peter Pan. Like, this is a real life, obviously the movie itself is not based off a real story, but this is something I can imagine happening in real life. Someone obsessed with the Peter Pan story becomes a maniacal maniac, crazy person, and starts doing this in the name of Peter Pan. And because of that, it merits the name Peter Pan. It merits the name of it. And so I don't think it's necessarily a cash grab in the same way that like a Mousetrap or Mouse of Horrors is. I think it merits the name of Peter Pan because it's believable that someone who's obsessed with this story and is also a crazy killer will use that story and take up that moniker. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that something like that could happen. And because of that, I think it helps with the story. The Tinkerbell stuff, I think, was a little, execution-wise, was awkward, but I did enjoy it as an idea. This one, I am putting in Isn't It Marvelous, because I really enjoyed Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare. And next we have Wolfman. Now this was my most anticipated movie of January by far. It's pretty much the only movie I was truly anticipating in January. And it was my second most anticipated horror film of the entire year. I love Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man. It's one of my favorite horror movies of the 2020s. One of my favorite movies of the 2020s. I believe it still is. I might have to check some of the release dates, but I believe it's still my favorite movie of 2020, the year. I love The Invisible Man, and I love Leigh Whannell in general. So I was very much looking forward to this sort of outside, odd, different take on the Wolfman, and I was wholly disappointed. I still think it's a good movie. I think it gets a little too much hate, just a little bit, because I do think it's a good movie, but it is still very disappointing. It's one of those movies that will go down probably in like the most disappointing of the year potential, but not necessarily a bad movie. I am going to put it in yup, because that's what after I watched it, I was like, yeah, yup, that happened, that existed. It's disappointing because it's Leigh Whannell. Like, his movies are usually up here, and this one's it's down here. You know, it's not down here, but it's here. But all of his other movies are here. And so this just has a very disappointing thing to it. But the main thing here is I love the visual stuff. I love the direction and everything. It's just the story itself. It's going for a lot of strong thematic elements, especially related to the family. But once you get past the first act, you don't get any real scenes that build up and develop those family relationships. So when your thematic expression and your themes and your whole thing revolves around these family relationships and this family dynamic, but all you get is a couple scenes of him saying, "I will always protect you." You don't develop that enough. And so when you get to that final moment, it falls flat. That being said, all the technical stuff, the cinematography is really good. The gore is really good. The transformation is really good. Like, I love the concept of this movie. I just don't think I think they needed more scenes. But just to build up the family dynamics a little more, that way when you get to the end, it's impactful. And next we have The Damned. This was the first movie I saw this year. And it's a movie I wasn't even really planning on seeing. It was like a Tuesday discount day that I had off from work. I randomly went out. I watched a review of it randomly. And then I was like, okay, I'll go check that out. And I'm kind of glad I did. Like, yeah, it's not going to be the best of the year. As you can see, it's just in the yup category. I just put it straight there. I liked it, though. I did enjoy it. I don't think they landed the ball well. It's too slow-paced for a movie that's only like 80 or 90 minutes long. That's the main issue, is I liked the pacing, but I didn't like the pacing with a movie this short, which is a little odd, because it just kind of gets to the point where you get a little slow burn, you get a couple scares here and there, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh God, we have 10 minutes, and just they do something. It just didn't land because the ending felt rushed while the rest of the movie felt slow. But overall, it's great cinematography, it's creepy atmosphere, it's great atmosphere, and you get this nice kind of Robert Eggers' The Witch kind of vibe going on, even though it's a very different story, very different setting, but it still kind of gets that same vibe and atmosphere in it. So I appreciated that aspect and that element, because I'm a big fan of Robert Eggers. It's good. It's a yup. I'm going to forget about it by the end of the year. But I had a decent time watching it.
It's not you. It's me.
And next we have Companion. This is one that I need to watch again. I'm not going to see it in theaters again, but to get a definitive opinion on it, I feel like I need to watch it again. I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it, but I haven't been enjoying it as much as everybody else. I don't know why. That's one of the reasons where it's like I sit there and I think about it and it's like, I loved that, I loved that, I loved that, I loved that. So it's one of those where I just need to sit down and watch again to see what it was. Because it wasn't the trailers. Because that was something where going in, I was like, the trailers ruined it for me. I wholly disagree. Like, people that are complaining about the marketing after seeing the film, I don't think it's worth it, because the marketing only gives away the first twist. And the first twist happens within like the first 15 minutes. And the first twist is pretty much the whole setup for the movie. It's basically the plot of the movie. It's not like this third act reveal or anything. So that doesn't bother me too much. And there's like 4 or 5 twists afterwards that aren't even anywhere in the trailers or in the marketing. So you're still going to have just as many twists and turns. The marketing did not ruin this movie like I thought it did after seeing the marketing, but before seeing the movie, I thought it ruined the movie, but it didn't. This is one of those where I felt like something's missing, but I don't know what it was, because I liked everything in it. I wasn't amazed. I didn't feel like I was amazed by it. So I need to watch it again. And it's one of those that I kind of feel like I need, as of right now, I want to put it in the middle of Strawberries and Creamin' and Isn't It Marvelous. For now, I'm going to put it at the top of Isn't It Marvelous, but it could easily go up to Strawberries and Creamin' by the end of the year, and even go above Grafted potentially after rewatch. I can definitely see that happening. There's so much in this movie that was totally made for me. Like, the comedy works really well in this movie. There's a scene with a cop and Iris that I loved. And lastly, we have Presence. This is a movie that I was weirdly looking forward to because I loved the trailers. I loved the visual style that the trailers were giving off. And when I watched the movie, I loved the visual style. I loved what they were going for. And I did like the story they were going for. Like, I liked the story overall. But it did feel like a short story that was stretched to be 90 minutes. And that's kind of where this movie lies. It's a really good one-time experience, but that's about it. I really dug the third act. There's one character that everyone's complaining about, and when I initially watched the movie, I was complaining about him as well as I was watching it. But there's a twist with the character where it kind of goes from making you think it's going in one direction to and it takes him in a different direction. Spoiler alert here, if you plan on watching this movie but haven't watched it yet. There's a character that it looks like they're going to go in an essay direction with, but instead they take it in more of a killer direction. And I like that twist. That twist kind of saved it. When it was going in the essay direction, to be fair, I'm someone that kind of likes... I'm someone that's a fan of stuff like Irreversible and I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left. But there's a formula to that isn't in this. And so when you just kind of force that into something like this, it feels heavy-handed and forced. They didn't go that direction. And I actually liked the direction they went with. And I liked the ending that they went with and kind of how they talked about how time works differently in the spiritual world and how that kind of incorporates into the ending of this movie. I loved that aspect. But like I said, for as much as I loved all of that, it still feels like a short film or like an episode, a 30-minute episode of an anthology series that was stretched into 90 minutes. Because the majority of this movie is you just watching people go about their everyday lives and not necessarily moving the story forward, which I can appreciate depending on how it's done. And I do appreciate it in this movie, but I don't necessarily love it. So this is definitely going into Yup, just because I appreciate it. And I did enjoy the third act quite a bit. And I loved the visual style. But yeah, and I kind of ranked them as I went along. So the worst of the worst, and will probably, more than likely, hopefully end up being worst of the year, is Mouse of Horrors. And then there's a huge fucking gap here, because like there's a whole tier that doesn't even have anything in it. And you get to The Damned, Wolfman, Presence, and then at the top of Yup, yeah, Dark Match. That is just a movie that's made for me. And then you have Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare and Companion in Isn't It Marvelous. I will defend Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare. I loved that movie. And Companion is a great movie. I'm not the only person that's saying that. So, and then Strawberries and Creamin'. I said before, more than likely this will not stay in Strawberries and Creamin' as we get more 2025 movies getting released. But compared to the rest of this list, Grafted is in the top tier. I absolutely adored this movie. I loved what it brought. And I definitely highly recommend it if you're a fan of body horror. If you're a fan of The Substance, this is not going to be the same level as The Substance. This is not going to be greatest of all time in terms of body horror. But it's still a great fucking movie. So go ahead and check that out. I definitely recommend it. Well, go ahead and share your rankings and tiers and every movie and thoughts on the movies you saw in January. Horror movies, especially, but it doesn't have to be horror. Go ahead and share your thoughts. If you saw, what is it called? Den of Thieves 2, which I didn't see. If you saw One of Them Days, I think it's called. Go ahead and share your thoughts on those as well. I didn't see them. I might see Den of Thieves 2 when it gets released on VOD or streaming, but I'll probably never see the One of Them Days. Go ahead and share your thoughts on those if you want, because they were January releases as well. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. If you hated it, hit the thumbs down. And if you enjoy Heroes in Horror, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the ding, so you get notified when Heroes in Horror episodes drop. Remember, these opinions are mine. They're not yours. Because one man's art is another man's shit. And vice versa.